I blame a lot of the ethnic tensions and the problems that we're now seeing in Australia partly on the fact that we haven't been able or allowed to have a civil national debate on things like multiculturalism, immigration, integration and assimilation, without being shouted down as evil right-wing racists. Laws limiting free speech that have been shoved through our parliament by leftists in the name of anti-racism have actually gagged a very important national conversation for too long and made the problem a lot worse than it needs to be. And the ABC, our taxpayer-funded national broadcaster, has been appallingly negligent, in my humble opinion, in not letting a conversation happen. Case in point, an episode of the notorious Q&A program from around 4 years ago. Q&A claims to be a space for diverse opinions, but it often feels more like an echo chamber of left-wing ideas. The panelists range in opinion all the way from barking mad radical far-left lunatics up to, well, left-wing. This 2020 episode, which I'm using as an example, was on multiculturalism and Australian identity. And it started well with a very valid and articulate question from a young audience member.
Australia is currently experiencing rapid demographic change as a result of mass immigration. Simultaneously, many of us feel as though Australian culture is being somewhat diluted as multiculturalism is pushed. Why do we insist on promoting multiculturalism when it so clearly hinders us from a unified national identity and culture?
Wow, great question. Smart and well thought out. But don't expect an equally smart and well thought out answer.
It's a great question. I think that multiculturalism doesn't hinder us. I think that we also need to have a conversation about what we mean by multiculturalism. And that's to look at the dynamics of power and control and what diversity actually means. You know, we're seeing a push towards, say, for example, closing the gender pay gap and disparities in gender or other parts of diversity. You know, migrants who are coming to Australia and taking on entry-level positions, then working their way up. But they face often a ceiling. They can only advance so far.
Okay, stop it right there. He's jumped straight into Marxist theory of power and oppression. That is classic Marxism. He then switched a question about culture and gender and workplace, about culture rather, to gender and workplace discrimination. That was Tarang Chawla, a commissioner at the Victorian Multicultural Commission and social sciences academic at Monash University. The next person on the panel was Marley Silva, a young Indigenous TV sports host at Channel 9 and founder of the Indigenous Female Empowerment Network.
Hearing that question, it, to me, relies on a secure, stable and established Australian identity to begin with, and I just don't think we've ever had that. I think there's fragments of identity of what it means to be an Australian that have been derived from the Anzac spirit. You know, if you ask, admittedly, most of the time, if you ask the average white Australian, what it means to be an Australian, they'll talk about mateship and larrikinism and that stuff that comes from World War I, but we have changed so much.
Okay. I actually think if you ask most white Australians what it means to be Australian, they'll point to our nation's British heritage and centuries of evolution of thought and institutions and cultural norms and political and legal systems that have come from all of that. But anyhow, carry on.
And I think that because of the systemic racism that we've been talking about that still exists and the unwelcomeness that migrant communities feel or all these fragments within society as well, we've never been able to talk about what we mean as a collective in the first place.
I didn't follow that. Something about systemic racism and fragments and a collective. I prefer not to get my cultural analysis from 24-year-olds anyway, but go on.
But I think it comes back to, we talk a lot, particularly in the Aboriginal community, about truth-telling and honesty. And I think also not just about making sure that everyone has equality, but equity as well.
Okay, stop right there. More neo-Marxism, equality and equity. The two most unfair words in the English language. No, we want merit-based inequality and hierarchy, okay? Merit-based. That's how you move a society forward. You acknowledge that some people are better at some things than others, and you elevate them to add and bring value to everybody. Okay, so moving on. Maybe the middle-aged bloke on the panel will make more sense. This is Anthony Limo Learman, the comedian and radio and TV host.
Limo, can you see a way forward? Can you see unifying features?
I don't think we're diluting the culture. I think a better way to express it is to say that the identity is, the culture/identity is evolving. And as a multicultural society, I believe the multiculturalism makes us stronger as a country. You think about things that are uniquely Australian. What is unique to this country? And as far as I can tell, I can only think of 3 things that are uniquely Australian. Happy to be corrected online, I'm sure people will.
Welcome to Q&A.
Yeah. But 3 things, as far as I can tell, are uniquely Australian. Our flora and fauna, 1. Indigenous culture, 2. And Aussie rules football, 3. Okay?
Wow. Okay. So this bloke can only think of 3 things that are uniquely Australian. Our Indigenous culture, our flora and fauna, and Aussie rules football. Boy, do we have some work to do in defining what we are as a nation, where our culture and institutions came from, and what it is that actually makes us unique in the world. That was simply atrocious.
It would be nice if our national identity was built around our flora and fauna and our Indigenous culture. And if you look to New Zealand, the Maori culture is at the heart of the Kiwi identity. And wouldn't it be nice if Indigenous culture was at the heart of the Australian identity?
Okay, well, the dual nation that we're seeing develop in New Zealand is actually tearing the country apart, so we don't want any of that. As for Indigenous culture being at the heart of Australian culture, no. Indigenous culture is an important part of Australian culture, sure, but the bulk of our culture comes from our British heritage and institutions and norms that evolved over centuries, built upon Greek and Roman philosophy, the European Enlightenment, Judeo-Christian values and ethics, etc., etc. We're just gonna ignore all of that, are we? All of it, just toss it all out, forget about it's all about that Indigenous culture, footy, flora and fauna. My God. And I love the way he said that, you know, people will attack me online. Unfortunately, you can't attack anyone online on ABC content on YouTube because they never turn on the comments, which I think is an affront and an obscenity when it's the taxpayers who are paying for their content, that they cannot, we as taxpayers cannot comment. So they've got to stop that practice of turning off comments immediately. But that was the diversity, folks, of that ABC panel. Our national broadcaster failing once again to bring us any kind of an in-depth, sensible discussion about this incredibly important topic. Where were the historians on that panel? Where were the conservative thinkers? Why not bring on a community leader from a region where multicultural policies have actually led to tensions? Or a sociologist who could unpack both the positives and the negatives? Why are we listening to a 24-year-old and a comedian? There was discussion about how multiculturalism has enriched Australia, but no mention of the challenges that come with that. No acknowledgement of cultural enclaves, social tension, how some practices might clash with Australian values. No one challenging the dominant narrative. And then there's the audience. Did you notice how every comment that praised multiculturalism got a round of applause? Now that's fine. It's a live audience, people can clap for what they like. But it makes you wonder, was there anyone in that room who didn't agree? Australia deserves better than the ABC. And that's why we exist, to bring you the other side. But what do you think? Pop your thoughts in the comments on YouTube or on X, and let's keep the conversation going, because we don't turn off the comments on the other side. The only way to break out of an echo chamber is to start listening and talking to people outside it. You may have noticed if you've been overseas on holiday recently that you can log into your streaming services like Netflix or Prime in other countries, but the shows they offer are different and sometimes even better. You're paying good money for those subscription services. Why can't you watch? Well, with a virtual private network or VPN, you can log in from home here in Australia with an internet address from anywhere in the world. And big corporations and big government can't see where you are. Now, to be clear, criminals can still be actively found with police warrants, of course, but the average honest citizen will have their location protected from prying eyes of corporate marketers and government bureaucrats. If you sign up now with private internet access, we think they are the best VPN service out there. That's private internet access. As a viewer of The Other Side, you can get 83% off the price of your subscription and get online for less than $3 a month. Check it out right now. Go to piavpn.com/otherside. That's piavpn.com/otherside. It's a great service and a rock bottom price, and you're helping keep The Other Side going and growing. That was a segment from a recent episode of our fortnightly news commentary show, The Other Side, with me, Damien Curry. If you liked it, support us. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube right now so you don't miss a thing. It's totally free. Just click that subscribe button and the little bell. And check out our Other Side Unplugged show too, and join our mission to actually do something and change Aussie media for the better at othersidetv.com.au. That's othersidetv.com.au. Check it out now.